Everybody. My name is Hugh Ferrer. I'm the Associate Director of the International Writing Program. And it's my pleasure tonight to introduce Ramon Lim, Professor Emeritus of Neurology at the University of Iowa, and also to share in the celebration of his new book, Self and the Phenomenon of Life. It is not uncommon at the International Writing Program to host poets and writers who have been or continue to be involved in engineering, medicine, or the sciences, but in the American context, it is much rarer. Too rare. With his new work, Professor Lim is leaping fearlessly into the all-too-wide at times gap between the sciences and the humanities, and we couldn't be in better hands. Many of you may know, but let me relay a little of his professional background, which reaches into biochemistry, molecular biology, neurochemistry, neurobiology, neuroscience, and neurology. After earning his MD in the Philippines and a PhD in biochemistry at the University of Pennsylvania, he embarked on postdoctoral work at the University of Michigan, where he participated in research on the molecular basis of animal learning and memory. From 1969 to 1981, he was assistant and associate professors at the University of Chicago, where he engaged in a research program on brain proteins and their effects on the maturation of brain cells. Then from 1981 until his retirement in 2005 here at the University of Iowa, he continued that research on brain proteins and brain cell differentiation while also engaging in the care of neurologic patients and serving as the director of the Division of Neurochemistry and Neurobiology. This research, funded by U.S. National Institute of Health and U.S. National Science Foundation, resulted in over 100 original publications in prestigious and international scientific journals, including Science and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Beyond science, though, he is also a writer and an award-winning artist whose non-scientific work was collected in the bilingual book, An Anthology of Literary and Artistic Works of Ramon Lim. Lastly, not leastly, in his capacity as a humanist and a man of letters, he has served as an advisor of the International Writing Program, and over the years his contributions, as well as those of his wife, Dr. Victoria Lim, have been invaluable. Won't you please help me in welcoming Dr. Ramon Lim.
Thank you, Hugh. Today I'm here to promote my book. You don't know that. It's too obvious. And you know how I got this title from? In the mid-20th century, you know a book called The Phenomenon of Man by Taylor Chardin? And I paraphrase that title. I call it Phenomenon of Life instead of Phenomenon of Man. And this is about self, like myself, yourself. And a few years ago, when I started to write, I told a friend of mine that I'm going to write a book about self. And he laughed me in my face. He said, such a mundane topic. We all know about it. Let me show you. So he brought me to a supermarket. At the checkout counter, there's a magazine with beautiful bodies, and it's called Self. Okay. Well, anyway, that is self, of course, but my concept of self is much more than that. Now, I want to tell another story, which is a little more serious than that. And one day, I was walking in the park with my grandson, 6 years old. And all of a sudden, he turned back and asked me, Grandpa, do you believe in God? You believe in God? And I want a quick answer. Just say yes or no. I was caught by surprise. I scratched my head and think about it. If I say yes, I'll be pleasing some of my friends, but I will be offending some others. If I say no, I'll be pleasing some others, but offending others. So I could not decide. I keep scratching my head and ask back, what do you think? And he couldn't decide either. So we finally we went to see a person, a wise man who was supposed to know everything. And I would keep you in suspense at that point, because I would get back to it near the end of my talk. Okay, but now I will get into my real topic now. Some of you who had known me for a long time, you know that I spent a lot of time doing experiments in my life, almost 40 years. And then after I retired, that was in about 10 years ago. After I retired, I lost my lab. So what can I do? I want to do experiments, but I don't have a lab. Can you tell me what kind of experiment I can do? Gary? Suggest one. Or Chun Fang.
Gedanken.
What?
Gedanken.
Yeah, thought experiment. See? Thought experiment. You don't need a laboratory. Einstein did that, but you don't need to be a genius in order to do that. You can sit down and cross your legs, or you can assume the posture of Rodin's The Thinker, and that is thought experiment, right? So what? But I need a topic, and my topic is life. And now, when I was small, as soon as I realized that someday I would die, I started to think what life is about. But then I became busy with my career, exams, tests, and experiments, hardworking, writing grants, and teaching students. No time to think about it. But after I retired, it came back to me. And I said, well, this is my last chance. I got to get to the bottom of it. Okay, I don't have any more time to delay. So I started to take up life as a thought experiment. Okay, and the way I do it is by elimination. In other words, onion peeling method. You peel out one layer, then another layer, until you get to the very core of it. Anyway, Descartes did that when he came up with that cogito ergo sum. But I just follow his method. So I try to peel off life. Let's say I have a house, take it away, I'm still alive. Take away my car, take away my clothes, I'm still alive. And then you can peel off my skin. It would be very painful, but I might survive for a couple of days, so life is still there. And then how about my heart? That's more serious. But then some living things don't have a heart, and they are still alive too, like a plant, bacteria. They don't need a heart to be alive. Then what would be the last thing? DNA, right? We all have DNA. Without DNA, no life on Earth. But nowadays, we think beyond the Earth. We look into the galaxies, millions of light years away. There are many Earth-like planets. Some of them may have life, or they may not have any life. We don't know. But suppose there is life somewhere else. Do they depend on DNA? Maybe not. We're not sure. So DNA is not a foolproof feature of life either. And to do that, I came up with a definition of life, which is in the first number 1 in my excerpt. Anyway, I will refer to this from time to time. See how I define self. And self is what slept at the very core of life. I said that self is a naturally occurring system whose activity leads to the perpetuation of this same system. Okay? And that definition has 3 main parts. First, it has to be naturally occurring. If you are specially designed by some superior intelligence, you're not included. When you talk about life that's spontaneously pop out of the ground. And also, computers, robots are not included because they are not spontaneous. So I only confine myself to spontaneously occurring system. The second point is a system. See, and system. What is system? It's not matter. It's not molecules. It's relationship between different parts, and with that I can fit into different concrete things. So I'm not attached to any particular tangible thing, but it can be applied to many things. As you can see later, I talk about self. A self is a self. Human body is a self, and a group of people is also a self. Yeah. A football team, a nation, a tribe, that's all self because it can be expanded. That's why I use a system rather than anything tangible. The third part is perpetuation. That is the most important thing. Self and life has the tendency to perpetuate itself. We all like to stay alive, and that's obvious. But how about bacteria or amoeba? Do they like to stay alive? We don't know. But they still have the mechanism to stay alive and to continue their existence. Whether they know it or not, no one can tell. But they still have that. So that tendency to perpetuate permeates all living system. You can say that a crystal, water crystal, they can form crystals, and they can, if you have a glass, it can crystallize when it's cold, but it doesn't perpetuate. See, once it warms up, it's melted. But for us, when it's warm, we have air conditioner. When it's cold, we put on clothes. We kill animals and use the fur to keep us close. We can do all those things to continue ourselves, but a water crystal cannot do that. See, so only living things has the mechanism or ability to exist ad infinitum. See, I don't mean anybody will live forever. See, a bacteria can, but animals cannot. But then we have a mechanism to procreate, to reproduce more of ourselves, and that is also a continuation. Only living things has that, and I call this kind of system self. As you can see, life and self is almost the same. You can interchange it. But then when a goal proceed, see, in the line of evolution from simple cells to animals and plants, all the way to society, that then it includes our inner self, see, introspection. That is different from what we usually known as life. See. So self covers a lot more than life. As you can see in this handout, that's in the first chapter of my book. You have on one side the construction of self, the physical self, atoms, molecules, cells, tissues, organs, like that. That's what you see when you dissect a frog, right? And on the left-hand side is expression of self, what we call humanistic or social, like feeling, love, hatred, war, civilization, existential, anxiety, religiosity. That's all expression of self, and that's what we normally call life in a social context. On the one side, life in physical context. The other side, life in the social context. And I was looking for something that can connect both sides. Some kind of a knot, a master knot where everything is tied up to. And if you pull on that knot, everything comes with it. and self is right there. See, if I pull on it, both sides came with it. Any questions or objections so far? Now, okay. Now I have a definition of self. Then what can I use with it? What can it explain? A definition or concept by itself is not very useful unless it can be applied to many concrete things. And now I like to draw an analogy with geometry. See, when we see so many things, we hardly think that they're all made up of lines. See, we all study geometry, and the simplest axiom is that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And with that, you can form a surface, a solid thing, and everything we see in the world can be derived from there. So I hope that my simple definition can be applied to many things. And I will give you examples of what it can apply. First, evolution. We all know what evolution is. Evolution, as proposed by Darwin, is natural selection. Natural selection has two sides. One is the gene. The organism, the gene can mutate slowly, and the progeny will be somewhat different. And those characters can be transmitted from generation to the next generation. That's one side. The other side is the environment, and the environment changes. If the new environment allow the new generation of organism to survive, then that organism will perpetuate and stay and go on. You know. So those are two sides of evolution. We all know that. But one thing most people do not talk about is the mechanism of organisms to persist forever, to perpetuate. We all know that, but we don't talk about it because it's so obvious. But I like to emphasize that point because that's precisely the topic of my talk. It can explain many things. There are two ways to hide something from a person. One is to lock it up, so you don't see it. The other is to put it before you. You look at it every day. After some time, you don't see it anymore. And this tendency of living things to perpetuate is something that we all know. It's under our nose, but we don't think about it. So I think evolution needs that. Without that tendency or mechanism of organisms to continue its existence, natural selection has nothing to work on, right? So I just want to call attention to that. The other thing I like to explain as an example is human nature. Is human nature good or bad? And what is the criteria of morality? It's easy to say that it's all written in the Ten Commandments or whatever. But suppose God is too busy and we don't have time to consult him. Can we come up with something without resorting to that? And with this concept of self, especially if you look at self as a expandable thing, the cell is a self. When cells group together to form an animal, that's also a self, a bigger self. And then group of people together, it's another self, a mega self. And then there is natural selection or competition. Natural selection works on single cells. like bacteria, for example. And it also works on individual organisms, like people or plants or animals. It also works on groups of people, like that. And well, not every biologist agree on group selection, but some do agree on group selection. I happen to belong to the group that accept group selection. Okay, and with that, I can explain many things, because one group competes with other group for resources, mainly, and then we have, how does morality come about? I like to reason it this way. A society can exist because its members has a certain cohesive force. Without cohesive force, it will fall apart. It will never last long. So can you imagine a society in which the members try to harm each other? It's not going to last for 50 years, right? So evolution built on human being in our gene. It's an instinct that we have the inborn tendency to help each other, see, even without close relationship. So that for me is the source of morality, without having to resort to a supreme ruler or whatever. It's not, you don't need to be commanded to do that. We are born with it, see. That is a debate for thousands of years in philosophy. Some people said people are born bad, original sin, for example, so we are all bad. And some people, like Confucius, said we are all good. And so my point is, most people are born good. Most people are pro-social. That's why that society can't exist. Otherwise, we don't see it anymore. What do you think of Neanderthals, for example? Maybe they don't have that. See, we don't know, but just a wild guess as an example. But our society, Homo sapiens, work quite well. See, we survived for millions of years, and because we have that inborn tendency to help each other. And the other thing is that even though we have that, but we still have our own self. See? When individual selves group together to form a bigger self, there's a conflict between individual interests and group interests. And we all submit to group interests because eventually that's good for us. But still, we always have the individual interests that stay with us. So the two has to be adjusted and constantly adjusted all the time. And let me give you an example. Every April, we have to fill up tax return. See, that's the time when your individual interests conflicts with group interests. We know that we have to support the government, but we don't want to. We want to deduct this and deduct that. There's always conflict, and that's normal. It's not because we have original sin. That's why we want to deduct. Because that's natural. It's our individual self and the group self. It has to be constantly adjusted. And also the government noticed that too, so they try to change the tax rate every few years. That's exactly the point. Okay, are you convinced? So that's another example why this self in the group context can explain human nature. The other thing that it can explain is like war, for example. Since time immemorial, people fight against each other all the time. The archaeologists, they dug up things, then they found weapons and all those killings. Never ended. It never ended. And that is because in group versus group, they fought for chance of survival, meaning resources. See, when the resources are limited, the competition are even more severe. And that is another thing that I think the concept of self can explain. Also, it all depends on where you stand in the war. There are usually two sides. If you are on this side, you think the other side is bad. Your own side is good. And you try to help each other, social cohesion. But you have animosity against others. So whether you are a war criminal or a diehard patriot, depends on where you stand. Yeah. You be inside the group, he said, this person is a hero. But the other side thinks he's a bad guy. So that's another thing that it can explain about war and also the goodness or badness of humans. Okay, the last example I will bring out is about free will. Free will is the perpetual debate in philosophy. I spent 3 years writing this book, and 1 out of the 3 years was spent in writing free will, because I could not decide. And this is a philosophical problem. I never majored in philosophy, never minored in philosophy. I just read some books. But after my retirement, I wanted to slip into the territory of philosophy without a passport. And it's very dangerous. Or you can compare it to a person driving without a license, practicing philosophy without a license. And it's very dangerous, so I need a full-fledged licensed driver to sit next to me before I would bump into a tree or run over somebody. And that I found in the person of Laird Ellis. He's a professor. Can you stand up and be recognized? Professor of philosophy at the University of Iowa. And I took a few simple courses from him. I had a lot of chance to interact and debate with him. We did not always agree, but I learned a lot out of that. Thank you, Laird. And also, he was the first reader of my manuscript. He read every word and gave me stern critiques. Something that is hard for me to take, but it's good for me. And he said, this chapter on free will is bad. It's real bad. So I had to change it, rewrote it, and again I presented him. It has improved, but it's still not good enough. So I changed it, and that's why it took me 1 year just to write that simple chapter. And the main question about free will is that everything in the world is cause. There's a cause and effect, causality. But free will is free. How can it be without any causing? It's kind of get out of the causal chain. Is that possible? And so I revised my chapter many times. And it was 2 weeks before I submitted my paper to the publisher that I realized something, and I added. And that, again, is related to self. Can you turn to the second page, number 8. My excerpt number 8 that was added just a couple of weeks before it went to press. And there I said that self permeates all aspects of life. See, no animal or human being will have the free will to go against it. See, you always want to exist. Even the pig, a butterfly, they want to exist. They want to continue their own existence, no matter what they do. No animal or living thing can go against it. So So free will can be very free, can be free of any causal change, but still it's hung on to that concept of self by one thread. See? So with that, it becomes reasonable. See? This is called compatibilist. Compatibilism is to say that even though free will is free, it's still consistent of causality. And that causality, if nothing else, has to be the perpetuation. See? And that is where I define in self. I hope Lit will give me a passing grade with that. Okay. Now these are a few examples for that my concept of self can explain. Okay, now I will get back to where I left at the beginning, and that is we went to see a wise man. And you know who is that person? His name is Charles Ives. Have you ever heard of that? How many people know of that name? Okay, good. Charles Ives was a composer, American composer of the early 20th century. And he composed a music called The Unanswered Question. Okay? And it's a short piece that I will play in a few seconds. And this piece took the form of a dialogue between two people. The inquirer who raised the question, and a wise person supposed to answer. The inquirer is in the form of a trumpet, and the wise man in the form of string music. And this inquirer asked the same question 7 times, repeatedly, each time with increasing urgency. And the wise man tried to answer, tried to come up with a solution or answer, each time with increasing frustration. And in the end, the two got into some kind of a scuffle, and they had a struggle. And at that moment, see, the inquirer got the message, and he was enlightened at that moment. So he left quietly, receded to the background, and lived happily ever after in tranquility and serenity. And Charles Ives' message is that the question is better than the answer. So the title of this music should have been, instead of the unanswered question, should have been The Unanswerable Question. Okay. Now I want you to enjoy this music. What's the question? second time. Third time. Fourth time. That's the end of it. Okay, so that's the music. Supposed to be the solution to our question. Now, last month, I was watching the TV and I watched the program called Nova, and they were playing Voyager. The Voyager was sent out 40 years ago, and now it's about to leave the solar system and go to outer space, never to return. But before it left the solar system, it turned its camera back and looked at our Earth, see? And you can see a tiny dot of dust. That's where we live. And I started to imagine that in that piece of dust, there are 8 billion people scratching their head, trying to find out how and why they got there. Of all places in universities of the universe, how they got into that tiny space. And as long as they do that, questioning, scratching their head, they are unified. There is peace on earth. But as soon as somebody came up with good answers, and there are no shortage of good answers, they started to tear each other apart, even to threaten to blow up that piece of dirt. So now this brings me to the last part of my excerpt, number 13. Number 13, the very end. What is religion? See, what is religion? Religion is the question raised. when our transitory self confronts the immensity of the universe. It is the question. It's not the answer. It's the question. That's what most people, the opposite of what most people think. See, because you go to see somebody and they said, well, my religion is the answer. But my point, my own thinking is the question. The answer, we don't know. And there are so many of them. It is an endless search without a clear-cut answer. Nonetheless, while pursuing this, a union is forged between the finite and the infinite, the fleeting and the eternal, and the process elevates self to the highest level of being. And this is a cosmic self that I'm talking about. It's bigger than just a group self, it's a cosmic self. You are part of the cosmos, of the universe. And that is what we are after. This union, this zeal is at the heart of religiosity. And Einstein said that a serious scientist is profoundly religious. Why did he say that? A serious scientist is a person who keeps talking to the universe, asking questions, and find out what's the secret of the universe, how it works. And that itself is religiosity. You know, that's what Einstein told us. And with that, I finish my talk, and I wish you peace of mind and have a good evening.
And
Okay.
Dr. Lim, would you happy to take questions? So if you have any questions, raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over to you.
So I'm going to make Laird mad. There was a book published a few years ago by Sam Harris called The Moral Landscape.
I didn't
And I
do
got
that.
together a group of people, including Laird, and we dissected it and hashed it out. But this is a guy who is, first of all, he's one of the leading atheists who's writing today. But
Yeah.
he also has a PhD in neuroscience, and he's trying to look at free will neurologically. So you can argue with the science, but I urge you to look at the book. I'm not arguing that it's a rigorous book,
Yeah.
but what he's doing is trying to see if he can detect neurological impulses in the brain while somebody is deciding how to ask a question. And he wants to see if he can show that the decision about what his answer is going to be was made by his brain before he knew it.
Yeah, I know about that. But there it's controversial.
Well, the question is it controversial because you don't trust his research or because you think nobody will ever be able to figure it out?
Yeah. That part is hard to explain. I don't know. There's no agreement. Some years ago, a person called Libet, readiness potential. It's almost the same thing, readiness potential. He discovered that before you are willing to move your finger, it's an electrical message. It's already there, see. And so some people thought there's no such thing as free will because it's already decided for you, your brain. But then they found out that can be overridden. Afterwards, you can still change your mind. so they think that's still not final. So we don't really know what that is.
Ramon, wasn't what you said about religion true with science as well? It's an endless search for reality?
Science?
Yes.
Yeah, science is like that. There's no final.
No.
There's no finality in science.
Yeah. All science can make is hypothetical
Yeah, right. Exactly.
inference.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, it can be overthrown anytime, depending on the new evidence.
Thank you.
See, there's always a certain tentativeness in science. You want to be, when you write a paper, you you want to say that it looks like it's like this, looks like it's like that, and it's really, can you be extremely, totally definite about your conclusion? It might be modified or totally overthrown.
Well, I just wanted to say with respect to these experiments that are, some people find them rather frightening actually, that appear to show that the decision is already made by, I'm back here.
Yeah.
Yeah. The decision is already made by the brain before the conscious mind wills or chooses or so on. That Friedrich Nietzsche, more than 100 years ago, had already suggested that possibility, or indeed he thought it was an actuality. And he was a very strong opponent of the idea of free will himself, of course. But that was one of his considerations against it.
See, one thing I want to add is that the brain is a stochastic machine. So you can apply chaos theory, deterministic chaos to the brain activities. So by its very nature, just the physical aspect of the brain is not easy to predict. But this doesn't mean mind is not there. See, mind can still be there, even though the machine itself is not very predictable. Mind can make it even less predictable. The two are not mutually exclusive. So it boils down to whether you believe that you have a mind or not. If you believe you don't have a mind, you can leave it as it is. Say it's a machine, like the weather. But if you think you have a mind, then you must find something for the mind to affect the brain. You know, how many of you believe you have a mind? Some, not all. Well, you're not special, because philosophers believe in mind, some philosophers don't believe in mind. See? So, but I believe in mind. See, I believe in my own subjective feelings. How subjective feeling is inborn. You have no way to prove its presence. You have no way to prove its absence. It's just there. It's just there. See.
A very simple question. In one of the emails, you were talking about your book that contains some Chinese elements, Chinese philosophy, or I wonder what that is. Thank you.
Well, the Chinese part now. I quoted Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is a naturalist, and he thinks that there's a absolute reality of the universe, but nobody can know, not knowable, you know. And what we see are the manifestation of it. That's I quoted that too, and at the end of the book I also quoted Zen Buddhism. There was a Zen monk in China who said that when I first practice, I see mountains as mountains and water as water, but in the midpoint, I don't see the mountain anymore, don't see the river anymore. But when I became enlightened, I see mountains as mountains again, and river as rivers again. This is often quoted by many people, and my interpretation is that, see, the first perception is a naive. Perception that you see mountain as mountain, like a child, for example. And then when you go to high school, you study physics, chemistry, and college, and you can start to analyze what's in there. There's made of sand, silicon, all those things. And at one point, you lose the sight. And once you are enlightened, you see both. See, you see the forest and the tree. And that is the reason why we like to learn. See, we like to acquire knowledge so that we have the wisdom of seeing the whole thing. You can say that, well, at the end you also see the mountain. At the beginning you also see, why do you have to go through the long process? But that long process gives us more understanding. Also, it gives us more ability to appreciate the unknowable or the mysterious part, see, of the universe, because you know a lot. According to the Chinese philosopher Feng Yuan, he said you need to know a lot in order to appreciate the unknowable part. It's like you have to know 1 + 1 is 2 before knowing what is -2. See? So we're getting into the line of philosophy now. That's why I'm saying that I was practicing philosophy without a license. You know? It's a dangerous way, but I thought I should get to the bottom of it and say what I really feel. See?
Could
Yeah.
I get back to point number 1, the definition of self,
Right.
a naturally occurring system, which you modified by saying spontaneous, so I presume that eliminates Frankenstein's creature.
Eliminates what?
As not having a self, since it didn't occur spontaneously.
What you say? It eliminates what?
Frankenstein's
Frankenstein?
creature.
Frankenstein's creature.
What do you mean, Frankenstein? Oh, yeah, that's okay. That's a good point. See, but nobody knows what Frankenstein creature is. See, it's an imaginary creature. Some people, a lot of mind philosophers like to say zombie. They like to compare an animal, a person without mind as a zombie. But I just don't think anything like that can exist.
Well,
Nobody knows. It's not a real creature. It's just imaginary.
That was a somewhat macroscopic example. Another possible example is the attempts to create a living system from non-living chemicals. A search has been going on for several decades, so far as I know, still unsuccessful.
Yeah.
Would a positive result be considered self?
Well, my definition excludes that because that's not spontaneous. Somebody made it.
Then what
It's an
about
easy
the
way out.
Then what about the beginning of life?
Well, we don't know. See, we have the faith that is spontaneously, but no one has ever any formula or equation to put things together. See, we know a lot about beginning of life by analyzing this, analyzing that, but the hard part is how it's organized. See, that is the hard part. We don't know that. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the very refreshing presentation. It's very interesting. Never thought about putting these two things together. I'm wondering whether you can talk a little bit. The word I kept thinking when I was listening to you is the word identity. I studied political science, so my question is identity is related to politics, I guess. How can you say something about this concept of identity? Does your book address this concept in any way?
I'm not very sure what do you mean by that identity, and
Well,
you mean
think
who
about-
I am.
Right.
Yeah.
When I think about self,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
ask
right.
myself, who am I?
Yeah, right.
In that sense, it's a question about identity.
Yeah, that
Right?
brings
I'm a
us-
physical self, I'm a social self, I'm a whatever,
Yeah, we have different aspects of
religious
self.
self.
Now, your identity is explained in that chapter called memory. self and memory. Memory is you build up your identity by your memory. See? And in my excerpt, it's called number 7. My excerpt number 7. Memory is the thread that connects the pieces of your past into a sensible whole. Without that, your past is all fragmented and you have no identity. In the shorter version, it is the equivalent of a calling card you present to a new acquaintance at a cocktail party. In the longer version, it is the resume that you prepare for a prospective employer. If yourself is a portrait, memory is the paint applied on the canvas, one stroke at a time. And that is your identity. This is called biographical memory, or here I would like to call biographical self. See? And that's why there's a question about brain transplant. See, if you have your brain taken away, throw it in the trash can, and get somebody's brain into your head, who are you now? You're already in the trash can. And the other guy is inside you, because the memory and his past, everything he did before, what people knew about him is there. See, and it came from this next guy. And you are lost already. Does that partially answer your question?
Okay, we have time for one more question.
So the concept of self being biological, psychological, spiritual, and also society, where does free will fit in these 4 concepts? Is it biological?
Yeah, 3 things, biological and what?
Biological, psychological, spiritual, and society forming self.
Yeah, they're all.
So where is free will? Is it a different concept or fits into one of these?
Well, I try to use self to unite all of that. It's one single concept that can be split into different aspects.
And
that's what I mean.
And where does free will fit?
Free will?
Correct.
Where does free will fit into the society?
What do you mean by free wills?
Free will.
Oh, free will.
This thing you were talking about.
How does free will fit into that? It's kind of complicated because you are bringing too many things together. I have to think of that. See, but there is a free will. We always talk about individual free will. See, but you can have free will of a group too. Group consciousness. See, culture. That's present in culture, in writings, books. See, in music, opera. See, people who listen to the same music, they group together. See, who watch the same ball game, they group together. And so that is part of free will. See, the society has a common sentiment, see, and they also have a common consciousness too, in the form of editorials, newspapers, all those things. There's a group consciousness other than individual ones.
All right, well, I think we're about out of time, but Dr. Lim will be happy to talk with you and sign books for you. Thank you all for the really interesting questions. Thank you, Hugh Ferrer from the IWP, for the intro.
Thank you for coming.
Dr. Lim, thank you so much.